So we'll bring up thing is complaining a bit. Hang on.
So we're just having one or two
Technical issues.
minor technical issues.
Here we go.
Ah,
Back
brilliant.
to Zoom. Share the screen. Yeah, still doing that thing.
Okay.
Close this tab. Again.
Let's open in the app. How do we start? Just to open it in the app up the top of it.
All right, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Worst comes to worst, I can talk to it.
Yeah. Sure. Let's just try this. I got it to work this morning when I first came. Oh, there we go. That's it. There we go. Okay, Saffron, can you wave if you can see the PowerPoint? Great. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thank you, James. Okay, so we're going to talk today about teamwork and communication. And I think having looked at this a couple of times, there's also an aspect of safety as well. So so can everybody see that?
Yeah. They're not skipping. Press there. Yeah. Really few demons today. Yeah.
Okay. I'll keep
Shall
that
I
there.
drive it for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is how individual behaviour and team dynamics in healthcare can make care safer or less safe. We're also going to look at a couple of structured communication techniques to improve communication and some possible interventions to improve patient safety and reduce risk during times of transition, which I think is all about handovers, isn't it? Yep. Thanks, James. Okay, we're going to look at fundamentals of teamwork and communication, tools and techniques for effective communication and safety during transitions across the continuum of care. Okay, so let's talk about why teamwork is important. So I think it's pretty obvious that a team is a group of people who work together in a coordinated way to achieve a common goal. Obviously, one person can't provide all the expertise needed to care for patients, and healthcare teams can help or hinder safety. So it's interesting there, 80% of serious adverse events are related to miscommunication. Would that be right? Would that be people's experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And communication being the most common cause of complaint.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That when I first looked at that, that actually seemed high to me. So that was one of the first questions I wanted to ask. It's quite interesting.
The last quarter's complaints and compliments data.
Yeah.
And communication right up there.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. When wrong site surgeries occur, there is usually someone who could have prevented it but didn't speak up. Is that true, James, from your? Yeah.
Historically.
Yeah. There's probably someone in the operating theatre who knew it was the wrong thing, but well, had a suspicion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's right.
Well, there's also speaking up and not being listened to.
Yeah.
There's been a very serious adverse event where that occurred.
Okay. Yeah.
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 Patients
patients.
In a theatre situation where a theatre nurse spoke up about the way a patient was being integrated.
Yeah. Okay, so generally, and I have found this to be true, strong teams take the following actions. So planning ahead, reflecting back, managing risk, and communicating clearly. So has anyone been involved in a team that's worked like that? Or what would be some barriers to doing those things, do you think?
Times, definitely.
Yeah.
Time
Yeah.
constraints, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it, I've heard there's a funny saying, and I don't know the exact wording, but something along the lines of, we've never got time to do it up front, but we've always got time to fix up our errors. So yeah, it's worth reflecting on that sometimes. So obviously, and this is much easier said than done, depending on the circumstances. As an individual, you must speak up, because no matter how much forethought has gone into a particular process, there will inevitably be problems that will be discovered along the way. So it's interesting. Sometimes I talk with my team and they say, I say, if only we could get rid of all the problems. And well, if that happened, then I wouldn't have a job. But I've always managed to find a job, so I think there'll always be problems. So I think there's sometimes a bit of a false expectation that everything will go right, and I actually think probably from everybody's experience that nothing's perfect, and there will always be problems. So I think that's why it's really critical to speak up if you see something. Thanks, James.
It's about feeling safe to speak up.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It's easier said than done. But actually, let's talk about this a little bit. So let's talk about speaking up. So what features of a working environment would make you feel safe in a healthcare setting? And maybe we'll just add speaking up to that. Because that kind of that's the crux of it really, isn't it? Speaking up as a healthcare professional when, you've got a senior person or you're in an operating theatre or you're pressed for time, what makes you feel safe in doing that?
I think there are operational challenges in embracing the idea that speaking up should be universally embraced, especially in emergency circumstances, because there are some time critical elements that when, that's why we have emergency procedures that go down the procedure, because if you have someone that is requiring attention that is outside of the direct task at hand, it can be actually a safety issue and a patient safety issue in and of itself. So it's a balance. You have to have the willingness organizationally to hear the comment, but you have to also embrace a team that needs to be aware that in certain instances, speaking up in and of itself is perhaps inappropriate and problematic. And so that's a challenge when the person is uncertain when they're trying to speak up, if this is that moment. I don't know how to solve that problem, but clearly there can be moments of intense concentration where somebody asks me a question in the middle of something that I could screw it up quite badly.
So how would we deal with that? So we can't do it in the moment. So what can we do to address that? So time critical, we don't have time to talk about this, we've just got to do it.
I think also safety is everybody's responsibility. Like, it's not just, oh, well, that's somebody else's job. Everyone has a responsibility around safety. We joke in anesthesia that the 3 rules of anesthesia are trust no one, assume nothing, and give oxygen. And it does sound a little bit guarded and paranoid, but we just expect things to go wrong at every step of the way. That's our default position. So that's where we sort of come from. We come from a safety first perspective.
Right.
Speaking to simulation, I went on Cara Thompson's Networks simulation a couple of weeks ago, which is a high-res simulation in the theatre environment of a scenario where you have to work as a team with the normal work colleagues in the normal place. It's just that it's a dummy on the table instead of a real person. And that brought up things like that, you know, how do you flatten the hierarchy so that Wally, who's bringing stuff for us like blood and stuff, is able to tell us that's the wrong label, I need a different label and stuff like that. And it's about that familiarity with people and getting working relationships going and sort of setting what the norm is.
Actually trusting people.
Trusting people, yeah.
And also,
Yeah.
I think respect as well, like respect of when to speak up in terms of the trajectory of a situation as well.
People need to know what their roles are in any circumstance. And I think when you talk about flattening the hierarchy, that has to happen before that situation. That is, can't do it.
No, you can't do it in
It has to be the
the
norm all of the time, rather than just, when we've got an emergency going, we'll have no hierarchy here.
So what about in a non-time threatening situation? So it's not critical, as you've mentioned. So what would make you feel safe or able to speak up in those sort of situations?
So having like time in and time out in the theatre is a great example.
Yeah.
Or adding structure to something that provides some time and place where people can feel like it's safe to speak up is probably a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is those building relationships, having trust and respect for one another, especially in a health professional team.
Yeah.
But that can be very challenging in large facilities. I mean, we're pretty lucky here. We work in a nice little small tertiary facility. But for those of us who have worked in massive hospitals with 20, 30 theatres, you're not going to know the people in the room. So it's got to be about your behaviours and about your the way you interact with people and respectfully and communicate clearly. Because you can't rely on knowing someone, and it's great to have your name emblazoned on you so that you've got a handle and your name and your role. That's great, but you're not going to know these people. You're not going to know their skill set. That's where the lack of perceived trust comes in, because until you know someone's skill set, you don't know if they can do the role that you're expecting of them.
Then I think if you don't know people, it probably takes a bit of courage to speak up.
I think in that scenario as well, you need standardization of processes so that everyone knows what's going to happen coming into it. And then I think that debriefing before you do something as well, so everyone's kind of on the same page.
Definitely, that's good.
But that's problematic as well, because you can only develop processes to a certain granularity. So when you have a basket that you're putting things in, there will always be something that doesn't quite fit in that basket, and so we have to adapt on our feet to the changes. And I think that's that bidirectional communication. What is the same? What is different? How do we do the same when we need to do the same? How do we do differently when we need to do differently? And to keep the lines of communication open and process is critical.
Right.
And I think also probably valuing that there are different perspectives around a given situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important, specifically in this organisation, historically, we've employed like-minded people. So if you always do the same thing, you always get the same result.
Yeah.
We need to challenge ourselves to employ people that think differently to us, so that we can get a better collective outcome. And that's difficult because
it is, because it's a challenge to the culture, right?
Yeah, it is.
It
It's
is.
comfortable.
Yeah, it can be an uncomfortable place to be.
Same.
Yeah.
But there also will be differing perspectives from differing disciplines around a situation.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jen. So what is a culture of safety? Oh, people treat each other with respect. I think we've been talking about that. It's safe to talk about mistakes and errors. I think, inevitably, and I guess I'm not 100% sure about healthcare, but from previous experience in other industries, sometimes there's a tendency to not talk about mistakes or errors, or sort of sweep them under the carpet or so forth. But I think it is quite critical to talk about mistakes and errors and talk about them openly. And I guess the other point there, which we've already talked about, is that safety is everybody's responsibility. So everybody needs to contribute to safety. Psychological safety. So I think these points are quite good actually. Anyone can ask questions without looking stupid. Anyone can ask for feedback without looking incompetent. Anyone can be respectfully critical without appearing negative. And anyone can suggest innovative ideas without being perceived as disruptive. But I think the underpinning for all those is respect, I guess, isn't it? And letting people have their say. And obviously can't necessarily do that at a time critical moment, but afterwards, you know, when we're debriefing or whatever, that's probably the time to talk through those things.
Can I just do a
Yes.
plug for the psychological first aid that's being run in this organisation at the moment?
Yeah, that's on Pulse, is it?
It's you enrol for Employee Connect,
Yes,
and
yeah.
it's a Zoom function.
Yeah.
So our professional lead for social work, she's previously done all day psychological first aid courses. And this particular, we've compressed it down to an hour.
Okay.
So that it's for managers primarily, but anyone's welcome, anyone that sort of manages staff or, you know, interacts with in a way that we can support one another. So we've got 1 hour long sessions on Zoom for the next few weeks on psychological first aid, how we can support each other in that space, and you enroll through Employee Connect.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. And that, but you can get through through Employee Connect.
Employee Connect. So
sure
you go in, once you log in, it's on the left-hand side, learning, and then you do a search, psychological first aid. You drop down the menu, and it just comes up, and it's district-wide because it's on Zoom.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Okay. Thanks, James.
I actually like that slide that you just had for simulation. that psychological. Those points.
Okay, so this is a question, I think. So what type of negotiation should healthcare teams try to use? Avoidance, accommodation, competition, compromise, or collaboration? Yeah.
Competition becomes quite prevalent.
Yeah. So obviously, where possible, this approach yields solutions that provide the best options for patients and preserve the relationships between clinical teammates. But the interesting thing is, it says when possible. So there'll probably be circumstances where it's not always appropriate, but I think where it is, that's obviously the one we should use.
You could add random selection to that as well.
I'm interested by that when possible, because that's not how I would view collaboration. Like, because I would view, if I work with other people in the healthcare team, I have a dependent role, I have an independent role, and I have an interdependent role. Yeah. And all of those roles are useful in collaboration.
Yeah. Look, my guess, I'd be interested in what everyone else thinks, is that where you perhaps, probably coming back to your point, where you have a time critical something happening and as an expert, and you probably don't have time to discuss it, that's where you just need to take the advice and move forward. Would that be right? Would that be fair in healthcare?
Unfortunately, that's when error is also occurring.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a surgeon, it's the wrong leg.
I think you can still collaborate in a really emergencies. In fact, that's where if you're doing a cardiac arrest, it is a collaborative way to try and problem solve and get the patient's heart started again. So there is a very good structure around it, but it's still collaborative.
And some people are acting dependently, and some people are acting interdependently in that role, and some people are acting interdependently in that role.
Yeah.
And so
I suppose, I mean, this is written for an international audience, and there are places in the world where you simply cannot collaborate with the nearby healthcare provider because they're your competitor.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe
okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, Joe. Leadership. So, who are the leaders at this hospital?
I think you have leaders in name. You also have leaders in
nature.
Yeah. It's, you know, we have people who, CEO, CMO, whatever they're called. And whilst they may be a leader in name, I might not see them. But I I like to think act in a leadership role, but also respond to leaders in other situations. So we're talking about the same sort of thing.
So what makes So what makes a leader? So if we forget about the org structure or titles or whatever, what is it that makes, what's your view of someone, the characteristics or whatever of someone in a leadership position?
There's someone that other people look to for guidance.
Yep.
And good leaders actually develop other people as well.
Yeah.
Almost a central repository for the collective. So a good leader should be able to have a finger on the pulse of the general vibe and the feedback, be in tune with people so that they aren't pushing their own agenda, but they're collaboratively representing the team to get this best result for that team.
Yeah. Is there anyone online who'd like, because I know we've done a lot of talking in the room here, is there anyone online who'd like to add their thoughts to that question?
PJ, someone that brings out the best from their team, supports the team.
Yep. Yes. Okay.
The other thing I think is that anybody can show leadership. It doesn't have to be a person in a position of leadership. Anyone can do that.
And then that's important to encourage, as you said.
There we go. Leaders are not identified by position or rank. They exist at all levels and in all groups. So strong leaders in healthcare who promote a culture of safety do the following: foster psychological safety and trust, which I think is that course you were talking about. Yep. Establish shared goals and invite everyone into the conversation. So that's, I guess, what we're talking about as a team. So they look for their team rather than for themselves. Yep, there we go. Someone that brings out the best from their team, supports the team, someone that looks at ways of improving service without leaving any team member out. Great, thanks, PJ. So let's talk a little bit, we already talked a little bit about this, but planning ahead and reflecting back. So you can use briefings, so teams discuss the plan and expected outcome often before the procedure. Everyone knows what's supposed to happen and can recognise things outside the plan as problems. Now, I assume that happens quite a bit in healthcare. I mean, yeah.
I think one place where it doesn't work so well in healthcare, and it should do, is just the general running of a department or something. We don't have enough briefings. I mean, we do that starting to do that in theatres before the theatre session, but we don't, I know in other industries, they have like a 5-minute on the floor briefing before the start of every shift. We don't seem to have that in our healthcare. And certainly if we do have that, it might just be clinical around handovers, but we don't have input from management and staff and we don't have a meeting, a sphere for managers and nurses and other people to come together and say, these are the issues facing us over the next week or so.
Yeah, it's a bit.
They do have things like that scattered around. Like there's a 9:15 meeting every morning for all the theatre sort of management people, and they talk about the challenges coming up that day and that week. But I guess it's who do you put in each of those briefings, because you can't have a briefing with the whole hospital every morning.
Yeah.
But
we have a huddle in theatre at 7:30 every morning. So we just talk about if we've got enough staff to cover the shift and if we've got enough equipment to cover the cases, those kind of issues we discuss every morning. It's pertinent to that day's activity.
do you think a problem, well, something that, you know, we could improve on at the Southern DHB is that all these things kind of happen very siloed. And then sometimes they are talking about the same things, and I'm sure there's could be a lot more crossover, but we don't really have that.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, so coming from, say, you know, Fonterra, a massive manufacturing company in New Zealand, the operational looking forward piece in terms of planning how many patients are going to come in, how many are going to go out over the next week, next month, etc., doesn't seem as strong as what I'm used to. There's a lot, as you say, a lot of siloed, and it's a lot of, it appears to me, a lot of yesterday and today versus tomorrow or the week ahead. And I think that's somewhere, sometimes maybe we can trip ourselves up a little bit.
Sometimes we have that in processes as like pre-admission, day of surgery admission, and COVID-19 has also brought forward planning about how to fix a backlog. But it's sort of like it just happens in chunks, not as a whole.
That was one thing that was actually very good about COVID.
Yes.
Well, it was actually quite a few things in the collegiality, but it was amazing. But we did get a daily, I got a daily thing that said there are X amount of red, green, whatever, patients. It gave you an overview of what's happening in the organisation. So if you knew there were 30 patients, potentially waiting, for a swab and isolated, you had a different kind of mindset than if there was one in ED, and usually go, they're not going to be COVID anyway. So actually having that daily kind of overall hospital insight was actually very, very useful to your understanding how the hospital works. The amount of time to sit in the ED, you go, there's bed block, and you go, well, theatre's still happening. You go, how can we be doing, to understand the overall way the hospital is being bed blocked or whatever, actually allows you to frame your own, so use your own frame of reference and to understand the challenges that other teams might be.
Part of the issue is that as a clinician, your focus is on the patient that's in front of you at any moment in time.
And rightly so, of course.
And the idea of the number of patients and the volumes and the flow through the organization is there. It's in the back of your mind, but you still have to take care of the patient that's in front of you. And I think that the different than industry where we're looking, you can see that you can focus on that larger trajectory. We need to have input and remind us of what we could change in that one-on-one interaction that can help, or the larger process. And sometimes that requires a higher level of oversight of what's happening and change of focus. And I think this is what the kind of conversations are about.
Leading on to that, I think probably is prioritising then. Once you know what's going on, you can prioritise and utilise your team better, potentially.
To be able to manage, to understand, to know how your patient works in the big, you're focusing on your patient, but say if you're a patient needs to come in for an acute procedure, but it doesn't matter whether it happens today, tomorrow, or the next day. If you know that the hospital's at 150% capacity and there are no theatres and there's no staff, then you go, okay, we won't push for that today, but I will plan, think ahead and see if I can do something. So I do think that to have the umbrella actually allows you to be able to focus on your patient perhaps even better. That's my prioritise. But there's sometimes that, it doesn't really matter what happens, that patient has to come and let you know this.
You have to have the trust in the system though, because if you say, I'm not going to push for this patient today because it's okay for them to be done tomorrow, and then something else happens tomorrow and you haven't pushed yesterday and it's on no one's radar,
That's a good point.
I think one of the challenges for the hospital is to provide that information to you as clinicians in easy to digest, understandable, easily accessible format, so it can help you make those decisions. It can't be something, because as you say, you're concentrating on your one patient, but it's got to be easy to understand, easy to use, so it can provide that information. It's no good you guys having to dive into Pulse and go down 8 levels and open a spreadsheet and interpret it and those sort of things. That's not going to work. It's not going to work. But if we can provide it in a way that's easy to access, either on your phone or laptop or on a screen in a ward or whatever, that's the sort of thing I think that can help you get that understanding. So I was talking to one of the cardiologists the other day, and he said it'd be great if I knew what the waiting lists were for ultrasound and a few other things, because that means I can make my decisions about where I send my patient in terms of diagnostics. If I know there's 100 wait, 100-day wait for ultrasound, I maybe won't send them there, I'll send them somewhere else. So that, you know, that's the sort of thing. And he's been struggling for 14 years to get that both here and the NHS. So it's not easy. But, you know, that's the sort of thing where that, you know, and if he can just put that up on his screen and it sees it there, okay, wait time for ultrasound is, you know, 100 days, wait time for MRI, whatever it is 20 days, then that's what he's going to do.
Well, I challenge that because in actual fact you should be making your clinical decisions based on what your clinical need and what's the evidence for the patient, not based on a wait list.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or the wait list might be helpful in terms of understanding what else is going on, particularly in other departments that you're not privy to. We should not be buying into wait list driving decision making.
No, I don't think he was saying that, but it provided him with an extra piece of information to be able to make those decisions, I think.
And I suppose it's about being able to utilise the resources.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
So, but there are instances when you have clinical equity that you can choose between two different imaging modalities. You can choose between two different things where there's not a clear evidence-based guideline that would drive you one way or another. And so if you were able to select a limited versus a less limited resource and you focus on a less limited resource to accomplish the same task, I think that there is information that is potentially useful in the bigger picture. But only in those instances where you don't have a clinical guideline.
There's a good point on the chat up there.
Briefings in a variety of forms exist around the SDHB, but I don't see a lot of debriefing around from TGM. I would agree with that. I think I've heard recently of, you know, adverse events happening, and some teams have debriefed straight after that sort of critical event, and it's left people in that team with an idea of what was going on and stuff like that, and so closure, so to speak, whereas other people have just kind of walked away and left the bomb site, and there have been casualties in terms of some of the more vulnerable members of that team. So,
I think the problem with debriefing too, because we maximise our clinical time, so debriefings often occur at the time when you've got to go pick up the kids or whatever the pressures on your life are. So the idea of debriefing is great, but the reality is people are like, at the end of the day, I've got to get off.
Debriefing is used in simulation.
yes, it is a lot.
It is.
Putting my plates in.
So, hi, I'm Tony. I'm the person who asked that question. And the reason I asked that question is actually I acknowledge, and I've worked in ED down south for 20 plus years, but I acknowledge that debriefing can be a pain, but it's a really important part of actually how well did we do, could we have done better, and also actually acknowledging those really sensitive individuals. That may be another way to debrief with those guys.
Totally agree.
Sometimes it does happen informally. And you would hope that a team that's supporting one another would informally debrief.
And informally is excellent as well. I mean, we did it ourselves frequently, but in the end, for constructiveness going forward and how well we do what we do, and how, you know, allowing people to start working with those mistakes, because let's all agree, we actually learn from our failures. We don't learn from anything we really succeed at. So the result of debriefing is actually sort of finishing that loop and helping everybody to move along in some way, shape or form.
Good point.
Okay,
let's move on.
Okay, in critical moments, we can't hint and hope. So critical language, so this is talking about language. So designating words or phrases to indicate escalating concern. I need a little clarity. I am concerned. I feel scared. So puss, I think maybe is the way you say that. So concerned, uncomfortable, unsafe, and scared. And the 2 challenge rule, which allows a subordinate to take action if a superior is ignoring repeated concerns about safety.
Do we have that at the DHB? Because
we have PACER here. So PACE is an acronym around graded assertion. So you probe, you assert yourself, you challenge, you declare an emergency, and then you respond. So it's a way of approaching a situation, hinting and hoping initially, making a few subtle hints, and then perhaps getting to the point where you're actually challenging someone on something. And then if that still doesn't work, you actually declare an emergency and respond to it. So yeah, we do have those not that particular one, but we do have those sort of mnemonics in clinical work.
Or SBAR.
SBAR, there you go.
Yeah, so we've got SBAR, have we? Yeah. Okay.
The nurses love SBAR.
Okay. So how many people are familiar with SBAR?
I am with the I at the top, and I believe the I in front is actually really important.
That is.
It's introduction. Explain who you are.
Oh, okay.
Identify.
Okay. Okay.
And it can be done in one fell statement as well. You know, when you're coming into a situation, you can whisk through that in one easy statement.
Yeah.
And it's the whole idea is about giving enough information for the person to have an interest in what you're saying.
Okay.
I tell the registrars, when you're telling me to come to the hospital, you can say, you need to come to the hospital now, and I have all of this. Because I'm not there, I can't do anything until I get there.
Yeah.
And I can call en route to get more information. And you know, when you're 2 minutes into a situation that is time critical, you need to be en route.
Background is good.
I always ask right at the start, what's the question? Because what's the question is actually frames a lot of the information that's given. You know, if I'm phoned up and say, can a patient go home at 3 a.m, it's quite different from, can you get here now? But if I have to listen to a whole lot of stuff beforehand, then I've got a totally different frame of mind. Well, one, I'm awake, and the second one, I'm probably not. Well, the first one, you know. So I think if you frame it, I mean, SBAR's great, and I actually like it, but I also like to know what the question is at the top, because I think it frames everything else as well.
I mean, that's what they encourage in situations. So, you know, I'm such and such, I'm calling from such and such, and I need your opinion, or I need you to come in, or something like that. It's not, it's sort of a question, but
It's the recommendation.
Yeah.
I recommend you come in.
Yeah.
But I've had, you know, phone calls where it takes 7 minutes to get to the point. At 3 in the morning, I don't need 7 minutes.
Yeah.
I guess that shortens it as well.
It's a bit like, but this is what happens with acronyms. It's a bit like saying, well, the early warning score is 7. And
what does that mean? That's what I'm constantly saying. And what does that mean?
And what does that mean? Oh, it's
And also
actually
that's a
about these sets.
Yeah,
That's a purple dot telling you
really
7
interesting,
minutes.
because when I looked at this, the way I tend to operate is I would do the recommendation first and then why things need to happen. And I think that's what you're telling me as well, rather than go through all this stuff to get to a recommendation 5 or 6 or 7 minutes down the track.
I think some of these acronyms are about building clinicians as well. And so, you know, a novice clinician might need to do all of that to support them in the recommendation.
This is where it comes. It's where it comes from. So think of your junior house officer who really doesn't have a clue what's going on. This is the framework that they can at least talk to the consultant and get something sensible coming out.
I mean, that's
Okay.
Ask me 3. Is that something you're familiar with?
There's a poster like that in the foyer, and it says, remember to ask your doctor these questions, and they're very similar questions. I think it's like 5 of them.
Yeah, I've seen that because it says doctors and nurses. I'm like, I don't exist then.
No.
Because I think that's really important. So what we need to do as clinicians is do the read forward, read back of these 3 critical things in any communication with a patient. So do you know what your main problem is? I've told you what it is. You need to tell me that so that I know that you know what it is. What do you need to do now? Well, I've made my recommendation. What are you wanting to do now? And why is this important? It's the read back, and that's the side of patient communication. And if we fail to take the time to make sure that our patients understand the interaction, we've really created a problem. And this is a good way to sort of structure, you know, what it is, why we care, and what are we going to do next? I mean,
I think that talk back to one another is really important too, because it's what I understand of the situation. Do you understand what I understand of the situation? And do I understand what you understand of the situation?
right,
Yeah.
right.
And it's how we frame the question too, because so often in healthcare, I see, and I probably do it myself, we tell the patient the answer we want to hear. You don't have any allergies, do you? No, it's, do you have any allergies?
I don't know what an allergy is. So.
Exactly. Well, there is that too. You know,
I don't have any allergies, but if I take this medication, I'm probably right.
yeah, that's right. And so we have to be very careful about how we phrase things as well.
And then the next potential problem is sometimes you've got a clinical situation where you don't know what's going on, but you know something's going on, and you can't give information in a way that you would like to give information because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And then that also is problematic in terms of getting somebody there from a nursing perspective.
I think just in back to what you're saying, you guys were saying before, which we know about the complaint situation. If we don't do that previous slide communication with patients, then you'll get a complaint at some point.
Good point.
Because most patients do walk away from hospital situations in particular, not really understanding what happened and what was going on. There's too much going on for them, and there's lots of, you know, research evidence that shows that for most patients, they come and have a consultation with a doctor, and then they'll retain about 30% of it if you like.
And that's why you need to give it to different forms.
Yeah.
I think this has already been answered earlier on, James. I'll skip over that. We kind of talked about this. The medication reconciliation. Do we have this sort of standardization around medication?
Well, the pharmacists do. The pharmacists have a very clear understanding of what medicine reconciliation, and they try very hard to do what they can, but they're very resource poor. And we did some work last year with the pharmacy team to try and improve that in certain areas, and they're still working on that. They've taken up that themselves for improvement work, but I mean, particularly on the medical wards that where Tracy works, you know, patients have very complex medications, and it takes a lot of working through that, and it's meant to happen at every change and handover from care, like from ED to the ward or to the GP as well. So yeah, I can't remember the number, but you know, Gail said to me once when we were working on it, that in the States there's a huge and a horrendous number of patients die every year because they didn't have medicines reconciliation done at that point of change and handover. So, and then I think GPs have
I think we also are underutilising the patient in terms of giving them good understanding of why they're taking medications. Oh, that's my pink one, that's my blue one. You know, you get it all the time, and it's sort of like, okay, well, what's that blue one do for you?
Oh, I don't have it in the morning, I'd rather have it in the afternoon.
So I think we'll just. It's been hopefully you've found this discussion quite useful. It's been very interesting for me from a non-health background, but I'm just just because of time, maybe we might watch this video quickly. I think there was an exercise around SBAR, but I think everybody sort of knows it. I don't think we need to do that.
Sure, if you could just press mute for me. No, okay, we're just going to play this video. If you can't hear the sound, wave and do something to say you can, okay?
I work for a very senior, eminent surgeon who had a ferocious reputation. He did not want to be challenged. He insisted on being telephoned about every prescription that his patients were given, even the ones that I felt confident to prescribe, and then he would constantly find fault with the prescription. I ended up administering medication to a patient without recording the prescription, and the patient came to harm as a result of that, because the other doctors looking after the patient didn't know the medication had been given. When we sat down, and when I sat down and talked with some of the other doctors, they had also administered medication without recording it appropriately, because we were all afraid to go to the boss and say this is what we thought the patient should have. So as a result, the patient suffered side effects from the drugs that we had given. There was no record of what we had done. There were interactions between the drugs, and obviously I felt terrible about that. Thankfully, the patient recovered. I just accepted that this was the way it was, and I didn't know. I would certainly have been afraid to challenge him directly. People who are on the receiving end of this treatment on the ground don't have to accept it. It's no longer acceptable in medicine that we just tolerate this and we regard it as part of the culture of medicine. We need to say this is not the way we want to behave. This is not the way we want to train people to behave in the future, and it's dangerous for patients. It's not a personal choice not to tolerate. It's a professional responsibility to raise this as an issue, no matter how difficult it is. And that doesn't mean raising it directly with the perpetrator, but that means raising it with somebody who's in a supervisory role, a clinical supervisor, or somebody from the medical school, or somebody else. For too long we have tolerated people whose behaviour has been disruptive or unprofessional because they're technically good at their job. They're good surgeons, they can do the operation well, they're good physicians, they can prescribe well or they can diagnose well. You've got to do both. You have to be a good clinician and you have to be a good professional as well.
Right, so what are people's what have we got now?
Oh, sorry, hang on. Sorry.
So what are people's reflections on that video? Maybe if we just talk about that for 5 minutes and then we can have any other questions. I know it's probably a bit of a sensitive topic, maybe.
I was bang on though.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked in healthcare since 1984 and I've seen an absolute huge shift in behaviours in that time. But at the time it feels glacial.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the behaviours that I saw in the 80s would never be tolerated now.
Yeah.
But there's still room for improvement.
Yeah.
It's bullying, really.
Get this thing to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we'll just keep on here because I can't get this.
There's definitely more people now standing up and saying, actually, that's not okay. Which is good. And it does.
I know has there been a bit of work done on that sort of stuff in the last couple of years?
Particularly the speak up.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's still a bit of distrust around though. There's still people sort of feeling that that's lip service and it doesn't work in reality.
Yeah.
So that's going to take a long time to embed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, generally any sort of culture or behaviour change can take quite a while.
I think it's particularly difficult for junior doctors because they want to get onto training schemes. So, you know, they're not going to upset their seniors because some training schemes are really competitive.
Yeah.
And they have to, you know, sometimes put up with, that's where we have to advocate on their behalf because they won't, because, you know, they're going to cut, it's a very small, you know, group and time and time again you hear stories of people that spoke up and then didn't get on training schemes or whatever. And you have word got out not to employ this person. That's dreadful, but it still happens.
Yeah.
Sathran, sorry, I was just wanted to give Sathran an opportunity to make any comments? Maybe has anybody been in a situation where they're afraid to speak up?
I actually just encountered something yesterday, and it was a house officer giving some quite good feedback around an improvement piece that we're doing, and the consultant didn't like the feedback and rang them directly and gave them a bit of a berating. So I don't know who to speak then, but we'll feel as an improvement team that we can advocate on their behalf, because we want them to keep giving us feedback without the without the fear of being berated for giving that feedback. So we'll speak to the SMA directly, but it's still there. It's obviously, quite rife in some areas, so we do need to be aware of it. Yeah.
I think the most important thing is sometimes people don't have insight into their own behaviours. And in fact, so when you approach it with things like build, like we've had for the speak up, then in fact some people are surprised by their own behaviours.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's something we don't often think about.
Well, the culture enables the behaviours, right?
Yeah, and if you can become insidious.
Yeah.
It's not black and white. I mean, we all play a part in being victims.
Yeah.
Mark Willie, I agree with Robert. ISBAR, he's talking about ISBAR. ISBAR is great in calm setting, but goes out the window in an emergency. It's getting to 5 to 8. So you just want to wrap things up?
Yeah. Look, I just say thank you everyone for coming along. I think it's been a pretty good discussion. I mean, I found it very interesting. I think there is a bit of homework or whatever you want to call it after this as well, but I think it's in the course notes or whatever it is.
Oh, no, we don't.
Oh, we don't do that. Okay, no, okay, we don't do that. But yeah, no, I mean, is there any sort of final questions for me or? Yeah.
Do you see some commonalities between Fonterra and in this sphere of work and healthcare, or are there some stark differences?
I can give you a huge commonality and example. I don't know how many of you recall about whatever it was 4 years ago. There was the botulism scare at Fonterra. Massive, huge issue for Fonterra and cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. And aside from the technical issues around, it originally started when someone went into a dryer, which is where they dry all the milk, and dropped their torch, and the lens shattered. And so there was, and that's where it all started. There was glass and stuff like that. And there's a whole lot of other technical things which we're going through. But a lot of that was to do with culture. So there were arguments around who was going to pay for a test to test the powder. And the test cost about $2,000. But there were arguments between two different areas around who was going to pay for the test. And of course, and that was the culture at the time, because everything was driven by cost. And what you want to do is for your area, you want to pay as little as possible. So if you could get another area to pay for something,
So very similar then.
you did. Yeah. This is what I mean. And so you had these two areas argue. They were honestly arguing for about 6 weeks over who would pay for a $2,000 test. And this is a company with $20 billion in sales, right? But that was the culture. And because they delayed, things started to get out of hand and snowballed. And I mean, it wasn't the only reason. And there was some culture stuff around the execs, like people were saying there's no way this could ever happen and blah, blah, blah. And other people were arguing and so forth. So a lot of it was actually driven by the culture in the organization. And that ended up costing Fonterra reputationally. It was huge. Dollars, it was massive. They had a big reorg after it because of everything happened. I can remember there was like a gymnasium-sized, they had this gymnasium-sized room full of people trying to trace all the product. Because they couldn't trace, they physically did not have the systems to trace the product that was going all over the world. It was huge. So there you go. So there's a similarity. But it was, the key thing was it was driven by the culture at the time.
Okay. Thanks very much. Well,
Yeah.
that we've run out of time. Thank you very much for a great session, Patrick, and see everybody next month for the last one of the year. Okay. Thanks everybody online as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoying being back.